everybody is invested in something, in stocks and bonds, real estate, art, and the current market makes it difficult to even preserve value because of the asset price inflation. And gold hasn't been faring particularly well. So I think Bitcoin has a place there. And of course, the more ambitious version of that is that an eventual return to the gold standard, but with Bitcoin as a basis. So maybe we'll see some of that. If people are interested in hard money, then gold is the kind of canonical example. And if you look at why that's useful and why people chose gold, it's basically because it's scarce. And anything that's scarce has an inherent production cost, or it wouldn't be scarce. And basically, fiat money fails all of those tests. And so it has a hard time combating situations of financial stress where politicians and monetary economists will be impressed upon to print lots of money, which is where we are again. And of course, Bitcoin was released in 2009, right after 2008 financial crash, and lots of quantitative easing and introspection from central bankers about moral hazard. And here we are again, about a decade later, with the massive money printing. So it kind of highlights the point that I think the problem with fiat currencies, US dollar included, is that it's just too elastic and reactive to short-term political thinking, and so it's hard to use it as a basis. So, people basically don't save in it. They save in other things to try and preserve their value, and that's hard work. So I think for the average person, they just want to keep the proceeds of their work and save for the future. And to do that today is really hard. You have to be an investor, and you have to do extremely well. It's very hard to to keep up with the asset price inflation in this environment. People who have spent Bitcoin years ago have regrets about their super expensive router or t-shirt or what have you. But I think that's partly because it's going through a rapid adoption phase. Of course, it's short-term volatile. But if you cast forward to the top of the adoption curve, where everybody who wants a Bitcoin allocation has settled on what that is and it's stabilized at the full adoption level, then I think the volatility would come down and look more like gold and start to behave more like gold, which is, and apparently gold has tracked very well over very long periods of time in terms of its spending power. Still, of course, gold has some volatility. So, and as the other panel members have mentioned, that effectively fiat currencies, national currencies, are likely to persist. So perhaps people will use a kind of combination. And I think governments may start to include Bitcoin as part of their foreign reserve makeup. Yeah, I think there was basically a buildup of opaque, so lots and lots of leverage and recursive leverage where people would put assets like wrapped Bitcoin or stable coins into DeFi pools, get tokens representing their stake that had a nominal value, but very, very thinly traded, and put those in other staking pools and just keep going. And so basically you end up with some kind of enormous leverage. It's kind of like the housing bubble. Like, people think, well, houses can only go up, and they leverage and leverage and leverage. Eventually the market falters and it all falls apart because, triggered obviously by these very thin liquidity tokens that represent value, which is only really arising from the kind of momentum of a platform. As soon as the momentum falters, it falls apart. Most sort of clear example being the Terra Luna collapse. The kind of use case for Bitcoin is the sort of digital gold of the space, and it has the network effects, the committed long-term investors. So in comparison, I think of the other coins as more like utility coins. So the people that buy them to use a function in the network. And if you think about it on that basis, and this is something that John Pfeffer wrote about in an analysis piece of comparing rationale for investing in Bitcoin versus other coins, that it doesn't make sense to hold utility coins, to hold an inventory of them on a business analysis basis, you'd be better off to buy them as you needed them. And, a kind of loose analogy is if you would buy, prepaid minutes or prepaid bandwidth on a 3G plan or something, you wouldn't want to hold those for 10 years because technology improves vastly and the value drops and different technology displaces it. So I think that's the case for, utility coins or altcoins. And of course, it's not reflected in the price, but I would argue the price is kind of decoupled from the fundamentals of the situation, just sort of supported by speculators at this point. Yeah, I think Bitcoin is by far the most decentralized of the digital currencies. Of course, it's also disorganized, right? There is no, foundation or company or startup that owns 70% of the supply, and so there's no message discipline, there's no marketing. So you get to view the decentralization in action. But I think that just illustrates the decentralization, basically. But I think the individual, developers don't really have any meaningful control because there's a lot of peer review. Any change to the code is reviewed by others. There are multiple steps before, a binary is built and made available on a download site. And ultimately, there are lots of power users who are looking and, not trusting and verifying, basically. So that kind of verification of many aspects of the system is a good thing. In a lot of ways, Bitcoin didn't seem to run into conflict, even in the last 5 years. So people expected more kind of regulatory friction and pushback, which so far, of course, there's like various factors, but so far it seems to have been kind of increasingly accepted. Of course, there's still quite a lot of ambiguity about rules, but that's gradually improving, and more kind of mainstream financial institutions offering Bitcoin-related services. So I think all of those things feed towards gradual acceptance. Of course, you're right that governments may run into conflict, but we'll see how it develops. If it's sufficiently decentralized and global, one country's views on it or discouraging it doesn't seem to have hurt things so far.